Welcome back. We're here with another episode. I have Kurt with me today. I'm so happy to be back and
Hello, Ashley.
talking again with you. I was intrigued when this topic was brought up because I was not aware of it, really. So I'm excited to talk to you about the third Way-ism.
Yeah. So it's kind of a niche topic in the sense of it's getting a lot of play right now on a couple different podcasts and people. And the context is when we're having this conversation, we're about a month and a half after Charlie Kirk was shot. And there's a group of people who are saying, boy, Charlie Kirk really is modern, Billy Graham evangelist, this amazing person. And his way of doing cultural engagement is better than Tim Keller's way of doing cultural engagement, which is third Way-ism.
Right.
And so it caught my attention, and it's clickbait. I've been around long enough that it's like Tim Keller, who, if you don't know him, he's a longtime pastor in New York City and has written a bunch of books and has been influential to a lot of pastors, me included.
Right.
And so when somebody's like, hey, Kirk versus Kellerism, which one? I'm like, okay, I clicked, I got drawn in.
Right.
And I've heard stuff on both sides. Gavin Ortlund came out with a thing on it, Allie Beth Stuckey. So these are some names of people who podcast. And I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about it. And I said to them, it's important to remember that in the podcast business, which we don't do here as much, it's all about the clicks, meaning you try to sensationalize. So you're trying to get a topic to be like, oh, that's interesting. And they got me with this one. For me, as I was probably their target audience, somebody who's been like, hey, I understand the dynamics. And so that's the issue that we wanted to explore. And so the third Way-ism, the challenge is defining it well. Because when I listened to a couple different people on it, it seemed to me, as somebody who'd been familiar with Keller's work, especially that the characterization of it wasn't entirely fair because it was, well, third Way-ism means that you say, I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. I take a third way, which is
on the fence.
And I never take a stand on issues.
Right.
And even in one of the podcasts I heard, the example was, and they played a clip of Tim Keller talking about homosexuality. And they said, well, here's going to be his third Way-ism. And they talked about other people who had taken his views and run with them further, which I think is always dangerous. Right. Because anytime you say, well, this person took this person's view and then they landed over here, it's like, well, that may not actually be how that person thought about it. Now, again, if you're critiquing a whole movement and people are claiming it, I can understand it. But even those who would say Charlie Kirk was right, Tim Keller was wrong, there's people who have followed Charlie Kirk who probably say more than Charlie Kirk said. And so you always have to be careful with that. But anyway, the clip that they showed with Tim Keller was him talking about homosexuality. And he said, it is sinful if you understand the Bible. It is wrong. And he said, but it's also important that we understand that we're called to love our neighbors. And so, how do you say, I'm going to say something's wrong and I'm still going to love people? And he went down that path a while. And, the podcast people were like, see, there's the problem with third Way-ism. And at least I sat there saying, okay, so by bringing up love your neighbors, he's advocating for a third way. Right. He said it was wrong. He didn't equivocate on that point. So unless what is it that was third way about that in my sense? So as I understand Tim Keller's take on that, he had it first not really about politics, but about something around the gospel. And I'll read a quote here from him on that. And then it became part of his way of thinking about politics as well. So it started, this is from his book, Center Church. And he says at one point, the most important way to gain a hearing from postmodern people. So he's talking about how do you as a pastor, as a church, get people to actually pay attention to what you're saying. Because he says you're so often just shut down. He says, is to confront nominal Christians wake up sleepy Christians and even delight committed Christians all at the same time is to preach the gospel as a third way approach to God, distinct from both irreligion and religion. So there's his third wayism.
Right.
And what he was basically saying is you don't want to end up being religious, which is all the law, which is here's what you all need to do.
Right.
And irreligion, which ultimately is the idea that, hey, I just go and
Do
live
whatever I
whatever.
want.
That's
Yeah.
right. And the gospel is actually, no, the law matters entirely. I can't keep it, and I need. So that was his initial. Then he did talk about it some in terms of politics, but his way of thinking, as I understood it, was to say that you should, as a Christian, neither be Republican nor Democrat. You should be Christian. And at times, that is going to mean faithfulness to Scripture, that
Right.
you are going to challenge maybe the Republican Party on something and
Right.
sometimes the Democratic Party on something.
Right.
Because your allegiance is to Jesus, not to the party. It wasn't find a middle squishy ground. It was there's a third way, which is I'm not beholden to a party.
Right.
So again, kind of in the people who are saying, hey, it's Kirk's way or this,
Yeah.
they would say, well, Charlie Kirk came down clearly conservative and tied Christianity to it, and that is what is the new model for how we should do things. So that's kind of the debate
Right.
that's out there, and why we thought this might be an interesting topic.
Yeah,
So
I-
how does all of that strike you? What's your?
It definitely took me by surprise. I wasn't aware until I did a little bit of a brief research, and I saw the similar podcasts and articles. I actually saw this article from the Gospel Coalition that was largely for and understanding Tim Keller's perspective. They did pick apart a little bit of, I think, how it has been defined as of late. And I think that was kind of what I was seeing, is that they took Tim Keller's definition and turned it into something more, like you said. So I really like, though, in the article, he talks about not being a political poodle. I don't know if you've heard that term before, but I had it pulled up, the quote. He said, in his opinion, that the third wayism, he says, if I begin by thinking through things theologically, I will see that no political party perfectly mirrors a full-orbed biblical view of God, humanity, society, and the world. I may still vote for, even campaign for, one party, but my political vision and vocabulary will not become subsumed under the party's agenda, nor will I stop pointing out when it takes positions that are contrary to the Scriptures. Insisting on the Bible as a third way does not stop me from being politically passionate. It stops me from becoming a political poodle. So
and was
that's
that
where-
Keller directly?
I'm sorry.
Was that Tim Keller directly?
No.
That
This
was the guy writing the article.
Yes, and I
or the
forgot to
person.
grab his
Okay.
name from that. But I said, oh yeah, I was talking to my husband about it, and I said, this is interesting because I feel like in our own lives we have had some of these discussions without having maybe the framework or the vocabulary around why do we feel this way? Why does it look this way for us? So it was a really good dinner discussion for us.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So where did you guys land?
We landed with understanding Tim Keller's point about the third wayism, and I think might have been in this article. He also talks about maybe even shifting the language that it is the first way, that it should be our first way, and not not a third wayism, and that seeking Scripture and being able to find those nuances that he talks about, not being on the fence, that you are still passionate about what Scripture says. It was we land with I would say understanding Tim Keller's purposes for bringing out these points of where we could be in Christianity, with saying that my party is right, this is the only way, on either side.
What's interesting, as I've thought about it a little bit, is I think it's unfortunate that, and I get the podcast industry, that, hey, let's pit these people against each other because it's clickbait.
Yeah.
And to a certain degree, I also think that there's a legitimacy to saying, hey, if people have taken this quote-unquote third wayism to mean I don't need to take a stand on things that are clearly biblical, then I think that I understand that call, and I think there's a rightness to that.
Do you think that's happening?
In what sense?
That people are taking third wayism and not taking a stance?
I think there's always people who will take anything that you teach and then say, oh, I can infer these things and make these choices.
Right.
I think people who've been engaged with this often understand what I'm talking about here, that no, he wasn't saying don't take a stand. Even in Keller's points, like the example that was used in the one podcast, it's like, oh, if that's third way-ism, then I'm not really sure what we're talking about here. But I think sometimes, and so yeah, you're probably right. There's probably a bit of a straw man there. The people that they'll point to often are like Russell Moore. They'll point to David French. So David French is a PCA lawyer, PCA, Presbyterian Church of America, which is a conservative denomination. Now he writes for the New York Times, and he basically has become an apologist for democratic policy.
Okay.
Often. And so some people say, well, he's an example of third way-ism, and therefore we need to do away with that because that's clearly bad. Now, I don't know. Tim Keller's not around, so he's passed away. So I don't know what Tim Keller would say about David French. They're the same denomination. A couple of years ago, when David French was scheduled to speak at the PCA convention, they canceled having him speak because of the controversy around it and some of the positions he has taken. So that's where people get the idea to say somebody like David French, Russell Moore, they're giving cover to Christians to choose a more left political agenda than maybe is biblically warranted in their view. And so they would say, and that's where they're advocating and saying, oh, no, Charlie Kirk's way is actually the church being clear and taking a stand on issues, and it leads you right. Now, my challenge with that would be, I think when, well, let me back up before I even go there.
Yeah.
I like a lot of things that Charlie Kirk said and stood for. I like a lot of what Tim Keller stood for. And I think it's unfortunate when we go to the extreme examples with people and then say, therefore I have to dismiss all that they're about. And there are things that that Charlie Kirk said that, if you look at them just on their face, you'd say, is that the best representation of Christ? No. You're harder pressed to find that with Tim Keller, but they're in different lanes. And I think that's important to understand. So it's even a bit of a false dichotomy. Charlie Kirk was a political commentator. And even if you look at the current Turning Point USA rallies, which I haven't watched a lot, but I just saw in the news this morning, there's another college campus not sold out, but full with people coming and talking. But I looked at the list of speakers, and most of them are not Christian. They're political. So even Turning Point's revival today, like when they say this is a revival, well, is it a revival or is it a political rally? Now, when you mix them, again, you start getting this weird, okay, is this political? And again, I think some of the people, at least who are advocating for this, are saying, no, those things are totally tied. And I think that's where Tim Keller's position is more, these things shouldn't be necessarily tied together, because if you are allegiance to Christ first, then you will have things that you call out in your own party. So probably a good idea, and you and I are going to do another podcast on this. I probably shouldn't say that in case we don't like how it lands, but on IVF. So IVF is an issue. So for example, take that. So Donald Trump comes out basically with a blanket endorsement of IVF. That is historically against the evangelical Christian position. And most evangelical Christians who are in this space say nothing about it. They're just like, well, okay, I guess this is where we are. That would be an example of quote unquote third way-ism, where it's like, well, we don't want to rock our political allegiance because we feel like we have sway right now, and therefore we're not going to come out against him, even though he's saying something that is counter to a lot of beliefs. And
when you say third way-ism, as being defined now and not necessarily
correct
what Tim Keller's intentions were.
The way people are saying this is what it was.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
There's an old story about D.L. Moody, who was an evangelist 100 plus years ago. And I guess, who knows if this is real or not, but some woman came up to him once and said, I don't like the way you do evangelism. And supposedly he said, yeah, I don't much like the way I do it either. And he said to her, so how do you do it?
Yeah.
And she said, well, I don't really do it. So I guess I like the way you do it better than the way I don't. I'm sure that's probably a made up story, but it makes a good point.
It does.
That, it's easy to sit here and be like, oh, Charlie Kirk, here's what we didn't like. He said these things that maybe, especially around race, there were some things about Christian government engagement, where you could say, okay, those, I'm not comfortable with those statements.
Right.
But I like what he was doing on college campuses enough to say there's some good there. And I think the pitting, and that's my point, the pitting of people, I'm not sure is helpful.
Yeah.
And again, to understand a political commentator who happens to be a Christian, we can grieve somebody's death and see a positive contribution without having to always say, but I wouldn't do it that way. Just like we don't have to look back at a pastor who's passed away and say, and I'm not saying there's not place for critical thinking in that, but they both had unique lanes that can be seen as having a contribution to where we are. So
Yeah. No, I've definitely been convicted as of late as well with the cancel culture, just to really take a step back and ask God to search my heart when I hear something that I'm like, oh, that's totally wrong, or I totally disagree with what that person said, and not just to completely shut down that they, don't have something else that I could learn from, and that is for me. And I think that's really hard to do in today's society, especially when we're consuming things in these 1 or 2 minute clips where we're like, oh, well, that was way off base.
Right.
So I've been really challenging myself to say, let me go find something what this person is saying that I might align with. Let me find something that, especially when we're talking about within the Christian community, like if they're, speaking from scripture into the gospel, like there's trying to find more unity there than pitting people against each other or saying, I completely oppose what you're saying. So.
Well, and if the takeaway from Charlie Kirk's boldness in life is we should be bold and willing to engage culture on what does the Bible say about cultural issues, that's a good takeaway. If our takeaway from Tim Keller is your allegiance should be to Jesus Christ before a political dogma, that's a good takeaway.
Yeah.
And so I don't love the let's pit it, but I also get kind of how people get there and saying, hey, one of these has to be preferred to the other.
Yeah. Right.
So do you have other thoughts on this whole issue or?
No, I think as we do these topics, I think I'm like, oh, I've come up with something. We've got a topic that all Christians will agree on. And then I'll just do some research. I'm like, oh, no, I see your perspective. And so I just, I really appreciate Tim Keller and everything he's done and being able to explain it like he did. And then, like you said, I listened to a couple of the podcasts and seeing some of their perspectives on, definitely not wanting to be in the fence and on the fence with things. So it was good. It was really eye-opening to me to finally have some framework and vocabulary to put with some of the practices that we already have in place within our household.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and on the positive side of it, even though I said I don't love when people pit it, it does create a conversation about how should Christians engage with culture.
Right.
That is actually very important to say, okay, what does this look like? And, most of us aren't going to pastor a big church in New York City or be a person who tours college campuses debating people about values.
Yeah.
And so, there is a difference, but there is when I'm in the break room at work, when I'm online, when I'm talking to my neighbors, what is the path forward? And I think you can make either mistake ultimately, which is, well, I just need to speak the truth, regardless of how it lands where I am. But you can be so afraid to speak the truth that it becomes, quote unquote, I'm just holding to this third way-ism, that you don't end up speaking when you have an opportunity. And so in many ways, both have errors to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you found this conversation interesting and it gave you some insight into the third way-ism. If you enjoyed what you saw here today, go ahead and check out our other podcasts. You can go to Orchard Hill Plus, and we'd love to hear from you. Write us, email, comment. We'll see you next time. Bye.